Years ago, I discovered treasure. Treasure in my own backyard. My husband and I had just bought a house. It was a wreck of a house. It had half a roof, no working plumbing, no working heating, but it was a beautiful wreck of a house. It had high ceilings and 7 fireplaces and a winding staircase up the middle of it. And it had a backyard. Now, for years, the neighbors to this backyard had basically used it as their dumping ground. So the backyard was full of trash and lots of overgrown weeds. One of my first projects was to go into the yard and clear it out. Well, when I was clearing it out, I discovered there was a shed in the backyard. It was one of these old sheds with a corrugated tin roof and plywood walls and a torn screen door. And inside the shed, I found a steamer trunk, one of these huge steamer trunks, the kind that heiresses in Edith Wharton's novels take when they travel around Europe for 8 months. And it was in that trunk that I discovered treasure. When I opened it up, I found letters, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters. The letters in the trunk were addressed to a Mrs. Addie Bernheimer Seligman. I did a little research, and I found out that Addie was born in 1856 in New York City. In 1878, Addie got married to DeWitt Seligman. It was June 5th, 1878, and I know that because amongst all the letters, I found old New York Times with a wedding announcement in there. Addie had 3 children. She had 2 daughters, Ethel and Alma, and then her 3rd child was a boy named James. Most of the letters in the trunk were letters that James had written to his mother. Now, I don't know if her daughters never wrote to her, but I do know she didn't keep those letters. She kept the letters of James. Letters from when he was 4 years old and first practicing his handwriting. And it was so sweet. You know, Mama, what do you think of my P's and Q's? Up until the 1930s when Addie died. My favorite letters in this whole huge trunk of letters were the letters that James wrote home to his mother from 1908 till 1912 when he was at Princeton. These letters are absolutely charming and full of life. He was a wonderful letter writer, and he wrote to his mother not once, not twice, but sometimes 3 times a day. Now, the mail went twice a day back then, and so a letter that he posted at Princeton Junction in the morning could get to his mother in New York City by that evening. And the letters that he wrote were just really delightful recountings of what it was like to be at Princeton. And for James, it was great. He loved it. Even the hazing he described as bully. Hazing is bully. He talked about the basketball games and the football games. He talked about going to lectures given by Woodrow Wilson and how enjoyable they were. He talked about reading Charles Dickens for the first time and how much he loved Dickens. Now, this was a boy after my own heart. And you know what? I did fall in love with James. I fell in love with him. I was a young mother then. I had 3 kids under the age of 6. I had a teenage stepdaughter who lived with me. I had a part-time job. I had a house to renovate. And yet every day I made time to read the letters of James. Because when I read his letters, I could escape. I could be in college again, hanging out with this really fun guy. Now fast forward about 14 years, and my oldest son is going off to college. So I said, Peter, are you going to write to me the way James wrote to his mother? He looked at me and he said, sure, I'll write to you, but why? Why is it so important to you? And that really got me thinking, why is it so important to me? Letters. Why are letters so important to me? Why is it important that I have James' letters? Why did I want Peter to write to me? Addie Seligman saved all those letters, and she not only saved them, but on every envelope, she would write little notes about when she received the letter, and maybe something about the letter inside. On one of those envelopes in her trunk, I found an inscription that said, "No one to read this letter ever," and the "ever" was underlined. Well, how long do you think I waited before I read that letter? I really respect the privacy of letters, but these people have been dead a long time, and I love James, and I needed to know what was in that letter. So I opened it up, and I started reading it, and it was from the 1920s, and James had written it while he was traveling in Europe, and he had run into his cousin Peggy Guggenheim. Yes, the Peggy Guggenheim, whose father went down on the Titanic and left her tons of money and made her a millionairess, and she spent her money on art and on artists, and she founded the museum in Venice. And James wrote to his mother about seeing Peggy, saying, "Ran into Peggy chaperoning a weird-looking guy who may or may not be the father of her child." Well, I guess that was a big scandal in the 1920s, and Addie wanted to make sure that no one ever read about this. So why didn't she throw the letter out? Why did she save it? I know why she saved it. She saved that letter because she wanted to have that connection to her son. She wanted to have that bridge between the two of them always there, so that even when he wasn't with her, he was with her. He was with her through the letters. Because letters are a bridge. They are a physical connection between the person who writes the letter and the person who receives it. There are senses involved in getting a letter. When I get a letter from my son Peter, I see him. I see him in his handwriting. I recognize that handwriting, the looping L's and the really crowded O's. I can smell the piece of paper and just catch a whiff of Peter. I can feel the piece of paper, and I am feeling the same paper, touching exactly where he touched. Just like when I hold James Seligman's letters, I am touching the same place that he wrote on 100 years ago. You want a thrill, you go 40 minutes up I-95 to the Beinecke Library at Yale. You give them a photo ID, you sign a piece of paper, they take a little picture of you, and they let you in, and you can touch and see and read and feel letters written by James Baldwin, W.E. Du Bois, Alfred Stieglitz, George O'Keeffe, Lou Reed, Charles Dickens. I have held the letters of Charles Dickens in my hand. I've had a physical connection to this writer that I love so much. But letters are not only a bridge to famous people from the past, and not only a bridge to the people we love so much who are far away. Letters are a bridge to the past, to people we only know about because of the letters they wrote. In the mid-1800s, there were two women who lived in Hartford, in and around Hartford, Connecticut. Addie Brown was from a poor family. She hadn't been very well educated. She became friends with Rebecca Primus, who was from a prominent, well-established Hartford family. The women were very good friends, and then they became really intimate, physically intimate with each other. Now, Addie had to leave Hartford quite often for jobs. She worked in Waterbury, she worked at Miss Porter's school for a while, she worked as a seamstress and a maid and taking care of children. But she and Rebecca wrote back and forth to each other to maintain the connection, to maintain a bridge. And the letters are really very lovely. Very eloquently written. Sadly, Addie died in her late 20s. Rebecca died 62 years later. And when she died, the over 100 letters that Addie had written to her were found in her desk. She had saved them all those years. Those letters are now at the Connecticut Historical Society, where I read them. And I got to know both of these women through these letters. There was a connection between us, and it was physical. I held those letters. I saw the beautiful handwriting of Addie. In one of the letters, Addie has added a postscript. And she says, "Look carefully at the corner. I kissed the edge of the paper. Touch there and you'll touch my lips." Now, I held that piece of paper. I couldn't see the imprint, but I touched that corner, and I touched that place where that Addie had placed her lips in love for her friend, Rebecca. And this letter, I could tell by all the folds in it that had been folded over and over and over again. And I think that Rebecca kept it in her pocket so she could always carry that around with her, that special letter. Now, how could they write of love like that between each other? How could they know that their love would be secret and protected and safe? Because letters are private form of communication. It's a privacy that is still legally protected and still culturally protected. I will not read the mail of my neighbor. I mean, I read James Seligman's letter, but he was gone a long time. I won't read my husband's mail. I don't read other people's mail. We are prohibited by law from reading other people's mail. And because of that privacy that's been recognized for thousands of years, Cicero talked about the privacy of letters. Because of that privacy, what we're able to share in our letters can be very intimate. It can be very, private. It can be very important. And it is also something that is singular and unique. A letter is written for one person, from one person, to share one special moment or a series of thoughts in one person's life with another person. I went really way far back to Cicero and earlier in researching letters. I looked at the letters of ancient Egyptians. Egyptians wrote thousands of letters, which is amazing because only about 90% of Egyptians could not read or write, so only about 10% could. So how did they write these thousands of letters? They would go to their local scribe and ask him to write a letter for them. The best job to have in ancient Egypt was to be the local scribe. You always had work. People were always knocking on your door. And of all the thousands of letters that we do have, there are thousands more that we don't, because the letters written on papyrus are, for the most part, gone. What we do have are the letters written on pottery shards. The ancient Egyptians were very thrifty, so if a pot broke, they would save those pieces, and they would use those pieces to write out a message, or have a scribe write out a message, and they would send the message off. And in almost every Egyptian letter, you see the phrase, "It is good if the Lord takes note." What this means is that I went through all this trouble to write you a letter. I hired the scribe. I got the piece of pottery. I went through all this trouble. You should pay attention to what I've done. You should pay attention to this letter because of the care and thought and time that's gone into it. And the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, did not only write to the living. They wrote to the dead. They sent a lot of letters to their dearly departed. And these were sort of guilt trip letters. Basically, I did so much for you when you were alive. You can't send a little luck my way? And they would expect that having written to the dead, their favors would be granted. They just assumed all that trouble was taken, all that care was taken. Of course someone's going to grant my favor. I wrote them a letter. Of all the letters that I've looked at, and I've looked at thousands over the past years, the emotion that I see most often expressed is not love, it's not anger or debate, it's thanks. Thanks. Almost every letter has some expression of thanks, and some letters are all about thanks. Thanks for being there when I needed you. Thanks for the cookies. Thanks for being my mom. And thanks are best expressed in a letter because of the care, again, and the time. We don't have to go to a local scribe, but we do have to sit down, find a piece of paper, compose our thoughts, write legibly, find an envelope, find a stamp. It takes time to write a letter, and in taking that time, we show just how much we do care and how grateful we are and how thankful we are. That same care and thought is why we write condolence letters. When someone dies, and it's someone close to someone we know, we want to let that someone we know, understand that we know what they're going through. They're very sad. And we have a memory of the person that's gone, and we're going to remember that person. We'll write something that we remember special about that person who's gone. And by writing it, we're kind of saying, look, we're going to remember. They may be gone, but they're going to live on because we'll all remember them. And they're in this letter. When Abraham Lincoln was president, he had to write a lot of condolence letters. He wrote to many of the parents of Union soldiers who died in the Civil War. When his own son, Willie, died in 1862 of typhus, a flood of condolence letters came in to the White House. Now, these letters are moving and they're heartbreaking. They're moving because across party lines, across divisions, people who didn't agree with Lincoln on anything wrote him letters saying, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. And the letters are heartbreaking because almost every letter tells the story of, I know what you're going through. I lost my son, or I lost my daughter. This was the 1800s, and kids didn't have a great chance of surviving. And so these letters all shared with Lincoln saying, I know what you're going through. I feel for you. Let me take some of that burden. The letter was a bridge, an extension saying, I can take some of that burden. I can help you. It offered Lincoln a consolation in his really terrible sorrow. Now, there are many other aspects of letter writing that I could go on and on about, but my time has come to an end. So what I want to say is I want everyone here to experience the passion I have for letters, to go home tonight, to sit down and find a piece of paper and write a letter to someone you love or someone you think needs a happy note in the mail. Then I want you to put it in an envelope. Now, for you younger people, the stamp goes on the upper right corner, okay? And then you go out to the mailbox, mail that letter. I think that the Westport branch of the U.S. Postal Service will be like, oh my gosh, look at all these letters. We're not dead yet. Letters aren't dead yet. And you know what? Letters are not dead yet. Letters are alive because we are alive. And most of us will not make it into the history books. But by writing letters, we can create history. We can keep ourselves alive. So please join in my passion and write a letter tonight. Thank you.